When Etienne Lafont, syndic of the Diocese of Mende, died unexpectedly in 1779, his son-in-law witnessed a scene he struggled to interpret. Allies of the Bishop of Mende arrived to seize control of the financial affairs of the deceased syndic. After burning documents hidden in a secret drawer, they sent about 20 quintals of letters and contracts to the offices of the acting diocesan syndic. That syndic, Bonicelle Delerme, subsequently called on me to tell me in a menacing voice that I better not say a word about any of this business. In an alarmed letter sent to Guignard de Saint-Priest, the intendant of Languedoc, Lafont's son-in-law urged the intendant to turn to the roads inspector in Mende, Antoine de Blanquet, for help in filling out the full picture of the corrupt behavior he had witnessed. Very attached to his duties, the son-in-law noted, Blanquet was also incapable of altering the truth. Blanquet subsequently portrayed himself in similar terms in his letters to various officials. I want to use the case of Antoine de Blanquet and of the truth-telling mission on which he embarked in late 1780 to outline what I think was a newly emerging political mentality in pre-revolutionary France, one that reflected a new relationship between agents of the government on the one hand and the truth on the other hand. This new relationship rested on a set of interrelated assumptions concerning the public good and the character of the state's administration. Only since the middle of the 18th century had the term administration referred to an entity rather than to a process, such as the administration of justice, the administration of finances, the administration of an estate. As the administration took shape in the public imagination as the standing machinery of government, as an entity set apart from the king and serving as the source of administrative action, it also attracted suspicion for its seemingly inherent secrecy, a byproduct of the networks of privilege and venality that saturated the world of royal service under the old regime. This secrecy, decried by Lamoignon de Malherbe in his famed 1775 remonstrance aimed at royal methods of tax collection, had facilitated what he called the despotism of administrators, the noun administrator also having acquired its modern meaning in the course of the 18th century. To end the intolerable abuses that the secretive agents of the government had committed against innocent citizens, wrote Malherbe, Louis XVI needed to ensure that the administration no longer remained hidden. I want to suggest that this perceived polarity, setting state administrators, whose actions and motives were concealed via the theory and practice of royal absolutism, against a public increasingly conscious of its interests and determined to expose their secret subversion, structured the thinking and actions of Antoine de Blanquet from 1780 to 1782. More specifically, I argue that Blanquet's sense of his own mission as a truth teller signified the emergence of a novel ethos of governmental accountability in late 18th century France. It portended the possibility of a new kind of political agency in the years before the revolution, an agency we identify in the 21st century as that of the whistleblower. We know that Blanquet hesitated before disclosing what he knew. A full year passed between the death of the syndic Lafont and Blanquet's first letter to the intendant in Montpellier. But when he finally made his decision to blow the whistle, as it were, an astonishing amount of verbiage spilled forth, to use Blanquet's own words. He had evidently been pondering the bishop's suspect habits of governance for some time. In a long series of letters and reports he sent to the intendant between October 1780 and July 1782, Blanquet detailed what he referred to as a tissue of horrors involving the maladministration of the Diocese of Mende. The bishop, Jean Arnaud de Castellane, was a nobleman of great wealth and long lineage who had ruled over the region like a latter-day feudal chieftain since 1767. With the assistance of Lafont, whom Blanquet characterized as being dominated by a passion for despotism, the bishop had invented new taxes out of whole cloth. He had swindled the city of Mende in negotiations over control of the city market. He had shifted the financial burden of policing and the administration of justice to the population of the diocese. He had given license to officers of the Prévôt des Maréchaux to mistreat and extort bribes from those in their custody. And he had evidently ordered the destruction of evidence of his own wrongdoing in the immediate aftermath of Etienne Lafond's death. Even after the bishop's allies had destroyed many of Lafond's papers, however, Blanquet and one of his associates, the mayor of Marvejols, were able to take advantage of Lafond's untimely demise to piece together the late syndic's modes of operation and to uncover his financial mismanagement. The most visible symptom of that mismanagement was the pile of debts that encumbered Lafond's estate, roughly 160,000 livres worth of promissory notes and unfulfilled contracts could be traced to public works agreements to which Lafond had committed in the decade before his death. As the principal financial officer of the diocese, and as the intendant's subdelegate for the Gévaudan, Etienne Lafond was responsible for much of the administrative life of the region, the building or repair of roads and bridges, the upkeep of the Invalides Hospital, repairing the town's clock tower, and other tasks of routine maintenance. As happened everywhere in the country, local entrepreneurs were invited to participate in the bidding process that awarded them the leases regulating the terms of their work for the public, and Lafond directed that process for the Gévaudan. From early on during his term as syndic, however, Lafond stealthily inflated the value of the leases he awarded. All such leases had to be approved by the commissioners of the diocese during the annual assiette assembly that allocated tax burdens and authorized public expenses. Blanquet had learned that Lafond routinely overvalued the contracts and had the commissioners approve them, thus creating a surplus of borrowed funds that could be diverted as needed. Lafond's bookkeeping comprised what investigative officials would later characterize as a double administration, one of which conformed to the regulations of the province and was shown to the Estates General of the Gévaudan, while the other, totally contrary to those same regulations, was known only to Lafond and others who may have connived with him to falsify accounts. Lafond had clearly played fast and loose with the diocese's books for many years, but the bishop, Castellan, quickly recognized upon his arrival in the diocese that Lafond's ad hoc methods could be exploited for personal benefit, namely the appropriation of diocesan funds for projects favored or created by the bishop himself. Thanks to a cache of letters that seem to have been leaked or pilfered from the episcopal palace in 1782, we know that the bishop, soon after his arrival in Mende in the late 1760s, had informed Lafond of his pressing interest in providing for better and wider roads between Chanac, the location of his principal residence, and the region's urban centers. "Keep your letters short henceforth and don't sign them," the bishop had written to his syndic in 1770. "I will do the same. You can be assured I will maintain the greatest secrecy." A few months later, he expressed his hope that the Estates General of the Gévaudan would allocate funds for the construction of a road connecting his chateau to the market town of Saint-Chély. "The road that most interests me is that from Chanac to Saint-Chély by way of Marvejols, because I have decided, and this stays between us, held in secret, that I plan to live in Mende only during the fortnight of Easter. There is a need for utmost secrecy in this affair." He wrote again just 1 week later, "I am thrilled by the progress of the work done between Chanac and Marvejols. I have expressed to you my secret plan. We need to stick with it and pursue it without interruption." Another letter showed the bishop and his syndic concealing plans from the commissioners of the diocese. Several others showed them disguising the origins and character of specific roads projects by using well-connected allies as fronts for their projects, putative sponsors whose names could hide the participation of the bishop. For the speed and convenience of his own travel, in short, the Bishop of Mende had pressured Lafond to find the funds to undertake costly infrastructure projects in the Gévaudan. According to Blanquet's ally, the mayor of Marvejols, all of the accumulated evidence seemed to point toward a single conclusion. There existed a secrecy at the heart of the affairs of the diocese, a secrecy faithfully guarded by Etienne Lafond. This could hardly be considered a surprise, since the secrecy was expressly recommended to the syndic by Monseigneur the Bishop himself. Lafon's methods of operation had remained covered with a veil that other officials could not penetrate. Now, corrupt behavior by powerful figures who seek to conceal their conduct was, of course, nothing new in 1780. But the detection of a pattern of corrupt behavior in the case of the Bishop of Mende elicited a response from Blanquet that the roads inspector himself understood to be unusual, risky, and explicable only through a specific language of political morality, one that contrasted secret self-dealing carried to the point of an absolute despotism against the interests of an innocent public kept ignorant of the full range of abuses from which it suffered. Indeed, Blanquet's consciousness of his unusual position as one prepared to chronicle and deploy the truth as a cudgel against corruption, thereby advancing the interests of the public, led him to distinguish in his mind between two different forms of secrecy, that used to cover corruption on the one hand, and that used to shield the conveyors of truth on the other hand. In his communications with the intendant of Languedoc, to whom he complained of a diocesan corruption cloaked in the most profound secrecy, he ironically sought for himself the protection of secrecy. Blanquet explained that his commitment to the public good and his love of order compelled him to expose the vice inherent in our administration, an arbitrary, unprincipled regime that had left the country so crushed that it could imagine no remedy except to accept its oppression in silence. But he had also had to face the reality that this work will create for me powerful and implacable enemies whose survival instincts would require the greatest circumspection on my part. I trust, he appealed to the intendant in the first of his letters from October 1780, that you will commit to keep to yourself whatever I may have the honor to reveal to you. His hope was that the intendant would manage to apply a remedy to the abuses of the Gévaudan without my being compromised. Blanquet's self-representation as an exceptionally virtuous official, motivated only by his attachment to a love of order and the public good, a phrase he used repeatedly, should of course be read skeptically. He had reasons, after all, to cultivate the confidence of the intendant. Blanquet was soon named to replace Lafon as the intendant's subdelegate, in fact. And there are reasons to assume that he took personally the bishop's misuse of his authority. Blanquet ruefully recalled in one of his letters that he had served on the town council of Mende when the bishop cheated the town out of its right to tax goods at the city market. But the totality of Blanquet's correspondence with Saint-Priest leaves little doubt about the sincerity of the insecurities he expressed to the intendant. The perils he created for himself would hardly seem to have been worth the pursuit of career ambitions or indulgence in axe grinding. Working virtually alone in a city where he was surrounded by clients of the bishop and by friends of the diocesan commissioners who he assumed shared in the bishop's culpability, he looked over his shoulder at all times. And he apparently had reason to fear for his safety. He warned the intendant in 1781 that the bishop was determined to snuff out even the least murmuring against his excesses. A well-informed man had since communicated to Blanquet that the bishop and his coterie had developed very violent suspicions toward him. They suspected him, that is, of being the inside informant who was apparently keeping the intendant abreast of developments in Mende. Blanquet reported to Saint-Priest that he suspected that agents of the bishop had tampered with his mail. Note to your secretary, he wrote in early 1782, that with our secret letters, it is essential that they be folded in such a manner that they can't be read without unsealing them. Your last letter could be read through the seal, and Blanquet had reasons to fear such indiscretion. He also expressed concern over the level of security in the intendant's office. He feared that the bishop's suspicions will inspire the leaders of our administration to go to impossible lengths to extract the secret from one of your secretaries, that is, the secret correspondence, his secret identity. I dare to hope that you will take the most serious precautions in this regard. Saint-Priest did his best to reassure him. In July 1782, a relative with connections at the episcopal palace warned Blanquet that the bishop had been very offended by an anonymously authored report on the diocese's tax collection procedures, and that there were reasons to assume that the bomb is about to explode. Blanquet had little doubt about who would be imperiled by this detonation. My love for the truth and my disagreeable zeal were likely to provoke violence from the bishop's henchmen, he wrote, since there's nothing they would not do to succeed in silencing him. Borrowing the words of the poet Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, he communicated his vision of the retribution he thought might await him. Let us rid ourselves, they will say, of this incorruptible censor, who even when tempted by benefits with irresistible appeal, will not be deterred in his quest for the truth. Let us destroy a witness who cannot be seduced. In his letters to the intendant, Blanquet showed an exaggerated sense of his own singularity, and he probably also exaggerated the physical dangers he faced. He never suffered any harm at the bishop's direction. But the very act of positioning himself as an incorruptible censor, defending truth and the public good against merciless despots, reflected a novel political sensibility on the eve of the revolution. This new sensibility was predicated on an interrelated set of beliefs. One, that corruption was endemic in the administration responsible for managing public affairs. Two, that checking and repairing corruption required that the full truth about the acts of government be placed in broad daylight, as Jacques Necker phrased it in his famous Compte Rendu of 1781. And three, that virtuous patriots had a moral obligation to expose corrupt behavior and to protect the public interest in doing so. Blanquet, in fact, wrote in one of his letters that he regarded his truth-telling mission as the task of a patriot. Blanquet ultimately failed in his mission to root out corruption in Mende. Here I will just pass over a mountain of details and simply report that the influence of the Bishop of Mende was indeed so great throughout the province of Languedoc that he managed to rig the investigation into his activities that the intendant had launched in 1781, and he managed to secure his own exoneration by the end of 1783. Nevertheless, the intense and protracted truth-telling experience of Antoine de Blanquet between 1780 and 1782, serendipitously captured by his rich correspondence with Saint-Priest, signals a shift in political sensibility that surely must count as one of the preconditions of the French Revolution. After all, a frustration with practices construed as despotism, the will to summon the moral courage required to confront despotism, and a proclivity to regard transparency as the reformers' panacea were all pronounced characteristics of the revolutionary mindset in 1789. In the summer of 1789, the Comte de Mirabeau referred to the act of exposing improper official behavior as the most important of the new virtues. And indeed, it became a mark of ardent patriotism in the revolution's first year. Vida Azimi notes that 1789 saw an outpouring of publications written from within the bowels of the various departments of the state administration. The authors of these texts sought, as in the Epistle to My Brethren, or the Administration of Forests and Waterways Unveiled, they sought to awaken the attention of the ministers of state. At a time when one speaks of nothing but reform and of the citizen's duty to enlighten the king's counsel about abuses. Jean-Paul Marat would soon defend as a revolutionary maxim the citizen's right to denounce the men in power before the state tribunal. And the National Assembly specified in legislation between December 1789 and June 1790 the appropriate steps citizens could take to pursue complaints against officials suspected of various administrative crimes. Although the practice of denunciation would eventually devolve into a mechanism for enforcing ideological purity and persecuting political enemies, the revolutionary practice of denunciation at its birth in 1789 specifically reflected resentments against harmful governmental secrecy. Under the despotic government from which we have just extricated ourselves, wrote P.N. Gautier in a 1791 dictionary of the French Constitution, the role of the denouncer was regarded as vile, No one dared exercise denunciation against that crowd of vandalous, embezzling ministers who had connived to render the term odious so as not to be troubled in their thefts. Now, however, we have learned our duties and recovered our rights. Every citizen is obliged to denounce the abuses of authority committed by those who govern. No longer would the French assume the probity of their administrators with blind confidence. The people should be sparing in its praise of public officials and never remain silent about the harm that they do. Our new laws make denunciation a duty. It is the safeguard of our liberties. To secure its liberty, in other words, France would need to become a nation of whistleblowers. Antoine de Blanquet, who was still waging battles against the Bishop of Mende in 1789, would not have needed convincing of that fact. Thank you.